A missent text binds a barista to the city's most dangerous vampire, and to a living ward that answers only to them. Mirrors, daylight traps, and a masquerade of claims collide in a slow-burn protective alpha paranormal romance. She texted the wrong alpha vampire. Now the city bends to their bond. Delia Santos did not believe in old families with cold eyes and colder habits. She believed in espresso shots, in late rent, in chipped nail polish that never matched the week she was having. The stories about the Vesper Court, blue blood dynasties that supposedly ran half the city after midnight, were for bored rich kids and ghost podcast addicts. Then she mistyped a number. Her thumbs were frozen from closing the cafe, so the text went out clumsy. If one more creep stares at my throat, I'm switching to turtlenecks forever. She meant it for Noor. It flew into the void instead. A reply arrived before the sending bubble even finished. Crimson. Turtlenecks won't save you, Sparrow. Delia's spine went rigid. New number. Blank icon. She started to type wrong person, thought better of it, and tucked the phone in her coat like a kid hiding a forbidden comic. She made it up 3 flights, down a fading turquoise hall that always smelled like damp paper. Her key stuck as usual. She hip-checked the door until the deadbolt sighed. 3 measured knocks followed. Not frantic, not neighborly. A rhythm like a cathedral bell. Delia rushed back, eye to the peephole. Empty hall. Old paint. Coil of extension cord drooping from the exit sign. Then the phone buzzed again. Crimson. Look lower, Sparrow. She stared at the jam, at the place where tenants taped up holiday wreaths when they remembered. A wet, gleaming glyph had been drawn across the wood. An elegant curve intersected by 3 serrated lines. Not paint. Thicker. Darker. The air smelled like iron. Her stomach flipped. She grabbed the kitchen towel and scrubbed. The symbol didn't smear. It sank, as if the door had drunk it. Crimson. Marked doors are under my ward. Rest. She stripped the towel from the wood and threw it into the sink. It was streaked a red so dark it looked black. Her pulse climbed into her throat. A desperate animal. Not happening. She locked the lock, slid the chain, jammed a chair under the knob, then dragged a bookshelf in front for good measure. Only after she'd built her amateur barricade did she pick up the phone and type. Lose my number. Dots appeared. Crimson. You used it first. She hurled the phone on the sofa and stood there with her fists curled, breath fogging in the cold apartment. Outside, a siren wailed and dwindled. At last she said, to no one. It's a prank. A messed up, blood-themed prank. She didn't sleep. She hovered. She listened to the building expand and settle and confess its old bones. Around 3, she thought she heard the elevator open and close without footsteps. By 4, she told herself she'd dreamed it. By 5, the glyph. Pulsed. Once, like a heartbeat under lacquer. Morning made nothing reasonable. Daylight showed the mark had crisped to a matte oxblood, fine veins branching out like frost on glass. Delia attacked it with bleach and a scrub pad. The bleach frothed. The pad squealed. The lines remained, unbothered, like tattooed wood. At noon, a tenant across the hall, Mr. Ferris, who smelled like cinnamon toothpicks and carried his cat in a sling, ambled by. New decoration? He asked. His eyes slid right over the glyph. You don't see that? See what? He pointed his chin toward her plant graveyard. You need something that survives on neglect. I recommend plastic. Delia closed the door, forehead pressed to the wood, and told herself she wasn't spiraling. She Googled every combination of red mark door the internet could handle. Some folklore blog mentioned blood seals, wardings laid by old houses to claim, protect, or choke. Consensus. If you had one, you belonged to someone who didn't need permission. Absolutely not, she told the empty kitchen. She should have blocked the number. Instead, she typed, "What did you smear on my door?" The response came with irritating gentility. "Crimson, a conquered sigil. It forbids others from trespass. It rebukes hunger, not mine." "Yours," she typed, then erased the word until the key squeaked. By evening rush, Delia had given 2 cappuccinos to the wrong customers and rang up a bagel as an oat milk. She forced herself to laugh at Noor's jokes. She didn't mention the mark. The story sounded like bait for eye rolls. She pretended her phone didn't quake every time the mysterious contact posted a single syllable like a thumb on a pulse. Close to midnight, she took the long way home, orbiting the block twice before admitting she was being ridiculous. The streetlights flickered. The wind had teeth. She plucked up her keys, looked both ways like she'd been taught, and a man stepped from the narrow cut between buildings as if the darkness had opened a door just for him. He was tall the way city scaffolding is tall, built to bear weight. His coat was old-world and immaculate, his hair black enough to drink lamplight, his skin pale as a blown-out match. Eyes, God, the eyes, were a metallic amber that shifted toward red in the angles, as if coals lived at the back of them. "Delia," he said, like he'd been practicing her name. She had a dozen things ready. "Wrong number. I'm calling the cops. Back off." What she said was, "That's not my name to you." He inclined his head. "You used mine first. I didn't." "You called," he said, voice low and resonant, threaded with something old. "I answered." A wind chime of warning went off in her bones. "You're Crimson." "Corvin," he corrected. The V cut like a violin string. "Of the house Vesper. The mark was courtesy. Predators frighten easily when they fear me more." She wanted to tell him she feared him exactly the correct amount. She wanted to run. Her legs forgot the choreography. He wasn't blocking the sidewalk, but somehow there was no path that didn't go through him. "What do you want?" A small smile ghosted his mouth. Nothing warm in it. "Agreement." He glanced toward her door, the sealed door, the one hiding under a bookshelf and chair, and the lamplight seemed to lean toward him. "And for you to stop bleeding your knuckles on protections you do not understand." She'd scoured the wood until her skin stung. She curled her fingers to hide the raw patches. "Take it off." Corvin's eyes warmed by one dangerous degree. "Ask sweeter." She took a step back, keys between her fingers like a guttering weapon. "Take it off." He did not move closer. Somehow he arrived all the same, attention wrapping her like velvet and wire. "No," he said gently, "because the moment I lift it, everything else will come calling." The unasked question leaped out. "Everything else? Hunters? Thrall brokers? Or worse, those who court my seat?" He half smiled again, as if amused by the word seat, as if it belonged to a throne instead of a chair. "The city is a banquet to the rude. I'm not dessert." Her voice shook, which ruined the line. "No," Corvin agreed. "You are a beacon." He looked like the lie she'd tell a cop if she survived him. Tall, expensive, unbothered. But a shiver pushed down her arms because the air around him lacked the ordinary physics of people. He was too still. The night wore him like a ring. Delia dropped her hand. "Get out of my way." He moved aside without argument. She had the idiot notion he'd always planned to. When she slid the key in, the glyph under her palm warmed. A brief, living heat. Corvin's head tipped, listening to something she couldn't hear. "What?" "You brushed the Concord." His attention flicked from the hinge to her face. "It knows you?" "Doors don't." "Shh." It wasn't a command. It felt like one anyway. He listened another heartbeat, then nodded, satisfied. "Sleep with the chair where it is, Sparrow, and with your phone volume on." "I'm not your—" "Not yet," he said, and the words crawled inside her skin like prophecy. When she turned the second lock, he was gone. The street reassembled around the absence. Noor listened to exactly one paragraph the next morning before her eyebrows tried to leave her forehead. You're telling me a goth billionaire LARPer branded your door and called you a bird? I'm telling you, I texted the wrong number and stumbled into an HOA for vampires. So, goth billionaire LARPer. Noor sipped her latte, grimaced, grabbed sugar. Did he sparkle? He glowed like a furnace in a fog bank. Delia cringed. I hate that sentence. Poetic dread. Classic you. Noor reached across the table and squeezed Delia's wrist. Block him. Move in with me for a week. We will watch garbage television until your brain is reset to factory settings, and then you will return to your unit with a baseball bat. I tried to call the cops. And? They suggested rest and an app to screen spam. So, capitalism continues. Noor sighed. Fine. We do this ourselves. Give me the number. I'll catfish him with pictures of my aunt's Pomeranian and lure him into a dog park where he will trip on a frisbee and perish. Absolutely not. The refusal landed harder than Delia meant. She softened her mouth. Noor, if what he said is even half true, replying makes me visible. You already are, Noor said, gentler now, to whatever he is. You got seen. Delia thought of the way the glyph had thumped when her palm warmed it, of Corvin turning his head like he could hear her bones. She thought of the siren stillness when he said not yet. That night, she moved the chair back into place and slept with her phone on loud, the way he'd told her. Which is why she heard the new message at 2:11 a.m. Corvin. Do not open the door, not for anyone, not even if they say my name. Absolutely not, she whispered, which wasn't an answer so much as a ritual. The knock arrived 3 minutes later, urgent this time, impatient. A woman's voice filtered through the wood, honey-soft and ragged. Delia, thank God, it's Noor. I lost my keys and… Delia's brain tried to sprint for the latch. Her hand went cold. Another buzz. Corvin. Not Noor. Delia pressed her ear to the door. The Noor outside breathed too evenly. The honey had congealed. Let me in, the voice crooned. Nails slid down the jamb with a curiously delicate scrape. Please, sweetheart, I'm freezing. The blood seal warmed under Delia's palm, slow as a cat waking. The air on the other side of the wood sharpened, like winter biting tinfoil. When the voice spoke again, its vowels were wrong, hungry, thin. Delia backed away. I'm calling the police, she said loudly. They did not knock again. They ticked. Impatient points, tap, tap, tapping, then moved on like a spider losing interest. Corvin. Sparrow. Still not your bird? She typed with hands that barely obeyed her. But alive. A pause. Corvin. Good. I will remove the bait. Bait? He did not clarify. 15 minutes later, a heavy hush passed down the hall, the kind of silence that cancels out city noise. When it lifted, Delia's lamp breathed again, and the heater coughed back into work. She slept 4 hours without dreaming. Delia kept telling herself that if she ignored it long enough, the strangeness would render itself inert. Reality did not find this persuasive. The next evening, someone slid a black envelope under her door. Wax seal. Embossed with that same trident/sigil in crimson. Inside, a card. Invitation, the Concord. Midnight. Come escorted or not at all. At the bottom, in neat, old-fashioned hand, Corvin. She considered the flames. The flames considered her rent. If a blood seal could anchor to a door, maybe an invitation could anchor to a life. Better to know the rulebook before the rulebook wrote her. Noor insisted on a tracker app and a safety phrase. If you text me kumquat, I call an exorcist. I need a priest, Delia muttered. I know a woman priest who teaches kickboxing. Text me her number after I survive the fancy Twilight courthouse. Text me kumquat if the hors d'oeuvres are bad. At 11:43, a car that did not belong to anyone ordinary slid to the curb. The driver, in black gloves, did not ask her name. The city folded back like a stage set, revealing streets whose bricks had kept the heat of battles no one had written down. When the car stopped, it was at the mouth of a subterranean arch, lit with red votives. The arch smelled like rain on iron and old books. Corvin waited at the foot of a short stair, an elegant gravity well in a field of lesser masses. The air seemed brighter within 3 feet of him and darker an inch beyond, as if his presence rearranged light allocation. "You came," he said. "You sent a wax-sealed command invitation." "A request," he corrected mildly, "and a guarantee." "To do what?" "To speak without interruption." "You have a lot of synonyms for order." "I have centuries," he said. "It breeds vocabulary." He offered his arm like a man crossing a ballroom. She did not take it. He did not withdraw it. They walked side by side down the stair. The archway opened into a hall of red stone and quiet, with sconces like tamed comets and shadows that stood at attention. People moved in the periphery, people as an approximation. Some looked human with the saturation turned up. Some looked like portraits whose painters had been bribed to lie. At the far end, beneath a vaulted ceiling painted with constellations in gold leaf, a semicircle of chairs faced a dais. Symbols had been carved into the floor. 3 nested rings, each with its own language. Delia could read none of them and somehow understood the geometry of their threat. "This is where you claim—" "What, exactly?" she asked. "Custody," Corvin said. "Protection, accountability. The concord is the law we use when we would rather not eat each other." Charming. A woman with hair like fresh snow and a smile like a winter blade drifted closer, appraising Delia the way wealthy women appraise pearls. "The sparrow," she said to Corvin, unctuous, amused. "You've made a pet." Corvin's answer was as courteous as a curtsy and as bloodless as wall frost. "My house does not keep pets, Lady Mireille. We keep promises." Mireille's eyes lowered to Delia's throat with clinical interest. "Promises that breathe," she murmured. "How quaint." Delia resisted the urge to cover her neck. Corvin's stance shifted. Subtle, an angle only prey would notice. Lady Mireille smiled and retreated. Corvin led Delia to a smaller chamber, quieter, lit by lamps with drowsy flames and a brass kettle hissing softly on a sideboard. "Sit," he said. "Ask me the questions you have carried around like glass." "Start with the mark," she said, remaining on her feet. "Why can't my neighbors see it?" "Concord script is written under consent." He poured tea. "Those who are not party to it fail to perceive it." "I didn't consent." "You texted into an old frequency," he said, unbothered by the protest. "Phones have replaced bells. Bells replaced knotted cords. Cords replaced blood calls. The medium changes. The summoning doesn't. So I butt-dialed a vampire oath." "Roughly." He handed her a cup. It smelled like citrus and wrecked sleep. "The seal answered that call on my behalf." "Unanswer it." Corvin's eyes sharpened. "If I lift it and someone takes you before I can intervene, I will be ungracious." He sipped his tea. "And then the city will be uglier than it is." "Is this where you tell me my blood is rare and powerful and special, chosen for a destiny and a gown?" "This is where I tell you you're resonant," he said evenly. "Not a prophecy. A physics. Some minds carry more charge. Yours carries enough to hum in my radius." She sat, finally, because the floor seemed to be sliding unpredictably. "Then this is chemical." "Metaphysical chemistry," he said, ironically compassionate. "You are not property. You are a node. That's somehow worse." He inclined his head. "It may become better." The kettle sighed. Somewhere in the bigger hall, a bell tongued once, and every hair on Delia's arms lifted. Corvin stood before the sound finished crossing the room. "Hunters," he said, the word too level for what it contained. "Please remain here." "Let me try being obedient to a command just once," she said dryly, but when he vanished, she stayed. The tea cooled. The lamps breathed. Somewhere in the stone beyond, the world gnawed at itself. Then something thin and patient slid under the door. It came as a smear of shadow, a wet fingerprint of dark that left no residue. Delia froze. The mark on her door had taught her the feeling of live magic. This carried nothing but absence. When it pooled at the threshold like spilled oil, her phone buzzed. "Noor. Kumquat. Kumquat, kumquat. Are you okay?" Delia typed. "Can't talk. Underground vampire courtroom." She hesitated, added a heart, hit send, and the shadow looked at the phone, though it had no eyes. "Do you mind?" she said, because terror made her rude. The shadow thickened like a tide. It touched the hem of her jeans, cool as old tile, and the concord in her memory warmed as if noticing. Instinct moved her hand. She pressed her palm, left, the scraped one, to the floor, and thought of the sigil at home, the first alive thing to recognize her in days. Heat budded. The air went sharp with penny metal. A faint line of red traced itself across the threshold, a poor copy of the glyph on her door, wobbling where her will did. The shadow reached it and quivered. "Yeah," Delia whispered, dizzy with relief. "Boundary." The hinge whispered. Corvin reappeared in a blur the human eye conceded before trying. He looked at the red scratch she'd made and then at her. Something unarmored flickered across his face. "Nicely done," he said, almost proud. She wanted to be giddy with it. Instead, she blurted, "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Look like I'm a clever cat with a mouse." One corner of his mouth betrayed him. "You are a clever cat with a match." He turned to the shadow. It recoiled like a slug salting. His voice fell into a register that might have belonged to bells struck under the sea. "Out." The dark thinned to a film and then to nothing at all. "What was that?" she asked. "A Thirstright scout." His eyes darkened. "I burned 2 of them in the hall. The third ran wet." "Thirstright?" "Rogue alchemists," he said, with the contempt of an old scholar for sloppy footnotes. "They bottle what should never be bottled. They sell hunger by the ounce." "Cool, cool," she said, gripping the edge of the chair. "So I'm a node, and nodes make good batteries." "Also cool," Corvin echoed, dry as bone. "We're leaving." "What? Now?" "The Concord is secure until it isn't. Your door is secure until it isn't. And the space between what is and what isn't narrows when people who profit by erosion smell profit." He held out his hand, formal as a vow. "Come with me, Delia." She stared at the hand for one heartbeat, at the veins that looked like ink lines beneath pale skin. Then she took it. The walk back to the arch was short. The ride above ground felt shorter. When they reached her building, her hallway had been wiped down to a blank that wasn't quite blank enough. Smears remained where blood had been. Not red, but the memory of red. Corvin looked at the door as a conductor looks at a score. "Someone tried to reverse my seal," he said mildly. "They failed. Because I'm a node. Because it is mine." He cut his gaze to her. "And because it prefers you to strangers. You make it sound like a dog. Dogs are faithful." He placed his palm flat on the wood. "And blood remembers." His eyes flicked. "Permission." "From me?" She swallowed. "For what?" "To bring the seal in. Closer. If you consent, I will lay it under your threshold bones instead of on municipal wood." The room behind the door had seen her grief and her worst haircuts, and the day she ate crackers for dinner. It was not holy ground, but it was hers. The notion of laying a vampire's banner beneath it should have curdled. It made her want to cry with relief. Do it. she whispered. He did not move. Say my name. She stared. Corvin. Again. Corvin. The third time, she felt it, like a filament catching. Let's not pretend that wasn't creepy. Consent is a ritual, he said, lips not quite hiding a smile. If it does not require breath, it requires nothing. Lawyer brain. Vampire brain. He pressed his hand harder. The door warmed, then the warmth slid under the sill, a subtle current like a river in miniature running through the threshold. The house itself sighed. Delia's shoulders lowered without permission. You felt that, he said softly. I did. She blinked hard. Does this make me complicit? It makes you safe enough to sleep. Will you? The question came out raw. Will you stay? If you ask, he said, as if it might ruin him either way. She looked at the chair, at the lamp, at the ghost of red. She looked at him, at the way the night bent toward him like iron. Stay, she said. His pupils widened, a predator's flash. Then I will. He did not sit. He settled, a long figure in a city's worth of shadow. Delia stacked the chair aside, not because it wasn't needed, but because the new seal made the chair feel like superstition. She made cocoa because tea had begun to taste like rules. He took the mug without comment and held it like a relic he intended to understand eventually. Do you sleep? She asked. I rest. In coffins? In legal phrases, he said, a smile quick as a cut. Trusts, wards, custodies, they are the boxes I lie down in. That's bleak? It is correct. She curled into the corner of the sofa, knees to chest. How old are you? What age do I wear? 30-something who forgot he turned 45 years ago. Flatterer. And really? A house? Titles? Do you have a coat of arms with a disgruntled bat on it? 3 ravens and a door with no handle. He looked at the threshold as if greeting an old friend. Vesper means evening, not bat. Ravens, then. Are you going to eat my neighbors? Only if they attempt to saw up my seal and sell it in vials. I hate that there are apparently vials. There are labels, he said, with a disgust that warmed her treacherously. Nightfall crave, kiss of Queen Mina, as if naming hunger made it charmable. We're making fun of the villain's brand identity, she said, hearing the relief in her own voice, knowing he heard it too. Is that part of consent? It is part of staying human. The heater clicked. The rain tried the window. Her phone buzzed, Noor's bubble. Text me the second he leaves, or if he's hot, I will bring a priest anyway. Delia typed an update that would not give her best friend a stroke. A question, Corvin said. Only if it's not, may I drink your blood, because the answer is no. His eyes flicked with a heat she refused to read. Not that one. Do you always deflect with jokes? Yes, she said. It keeps the sky from falling. Does it work? Statistically, the sky remains up. He looked at her like a man reading music off a heartbeat. For now. They were quiet a long time. Then, the first time you said my name, the seal listened. The second time, it consented. His voice had walked down a staircase to gentle. Do you want me to bind a second layer? An interior concord. It would connect to you, not the door. If you say yes, we will both be louder to one another. If you say no, the world will be quieter. What's the cost? She asked. Truth. Contact. The inability to pretend nothing is happening. She laughed once, dry. Pretending never worked. Then we can apprentice you to the truth. Apprentice, she echoed. Do I get a burgundy robe? A hoodie, he said gravely, with tasteful runes. Okay, she whispered. The word landed like a pebble in a dark lake. Do it. Bind the second layer. He did not reach for her. He held very still and let the air move around the shape of the choice. Say it for me. Corvin, she said, and the room braided tighter. She felt the threshold flicker, felt something touch the notch at the base of her throat from the inside, an alignment rather than an addition. She gasped. "It is only the tie," he murmured, eyes on her face as if watching weather arrive. "No debt." "Feels like a thunderstorm." She wiped her cheek, surprised to find it wet. "I'm fine." "You are brave." "I'm tired," she said, which was sometimes the same thing. "You may rest." His voice went hushed around the R. "I will keep the watch." "You'll what? Stand there all night glaring at my plants?" "Yes," she snorted. "Okay then." She slept with the wild luxury of someone who had been wired to a bomb for a week and finally heard a wire snip. When she woke to gray winter lights, Corvin was exactly where he'd promised, the line of him etched against the window, patient as a myth. News travels in the night the way heat travels through old radiators, with rattles and sighs and occasional clanks. By lunchtime, 3 different houses had sent feelers through the grapevine. Lady Mireille's came with flowers and a note. "We share an interest. Consider my offer if you tire of living under a man who collects birds." Delia pinned the card to her fridge with a magnet shaped like a peach and texted Noor a picture of the bouquet with the caption "Sender, Snow Witch, Vibe, Knife Wedding." Noor responded with 16 knife emojis and 1 peach. Corvin read the card, lips thinning. Mireille rarely asks nicely twice. What does she do on the 3rd try? Buys the building. Can she? He met her eyes. Yes. Then we need to talk to my landlord. We will. The we slid out of him like certainty. She let herself lean into it for 1 second. Then the apartment's buzzer sounded and both of them stilled. Corvin tilted his head, listening to currents she couldn't. "Hunter?" he said, without patience. "How?" "He stinks of oxidized silver and prayer someone taught him as a punishment." Delia's mouth went dry. "We can call the police." "We can," Corvin said calmly, "and they will arrive exactly 14 minutes after he does, and they will file a report that mentions a broken lock, and nothing else." He moved to the door. The blood seal ran bright, uncoiling veins. "Stand behind me, Delia, and if I say down, you trust me enough to touch the floor. Do we have a compact?" She wanted to make a joke. She said, "Yes," and meant it. The hunter didn't knock. He hit the door with his shoulder and an ugly block of metal that probably had a name like Shepherd's hammer. The seal flared. The hammer rebounded as if the wood had learned how to be a fist. The man swore, breath high and frantic, and slammed it again. Corvin opened the door on the 3rd blow because the seal let him, and because Corvin liked to set terms. The hunter spilled forward a step, saw a very old thing standing in an ordinary apartment, and smiled as if he'd won a dare. "Corvin Vesper," he said, pulling back his coat to show a chest harness with vials. "I've wanted to meet your arrogance in person." "And you are?" "Ezra Cole," the man said. He drew a knife that looked church-made. "Commissioned by the sanctum to cut your leash. Commissioned by poverty to perform theater," Corvin said, and Ezra lunged. "Down," Corvin said, and Delia's knees kissed the floorboards before she'd decided to obey, palms flat, breath held. A great wind surged without air. The light bent toward the threshold and then away, like a tide switching its loyalties. Ezra's knife whistled over her head and hit the molding with a thock that sang of carpenters. Corvin took 1 step sideways, 1 step forward, a dancer correcting for a reckless partner, and caught Ezra's wrist. "Leave," he said. Ezra spat. "I bathe in your dead." "Dramatic," Corvin murmured. He tightened his grip until the knife fell, until bone clicked. "My sparrow asked me to stay. You may call it arrogance. I call it hospitality." His voice turned winter. "Go home." Ezra twisted something on his harness. A cork popped. Wet chemistry. and the room filled with a cloying sweetness that made Delia's tongue go numb. Corvin's head whipped, nostrils flaring. "Bottled hunger," he said with flat fury. Ezra grinned. "Have a drink, Lord Vesper." The vials began to hiss. Delia did not think. She felt. The interior concord pulsed, a warm coin under her sternum, asking exactly one question. "With me?" "Yes," she whispered, and the seal under the threshold woke like a matched heart. Corvin's hand was still on Ezra's wrist. The bottled hunger slunk through the apartment like perfume from a grave. Delia reached, not forward but down, into the narrow bright line that connected her to the door and to the man who had asked to watch. She thought of boundaries. She thought of hands saying stop when mouths could not. The red line under the wood thickened. The bottled scent hit it and barked sparks like soda on a tongue. Ezra flinched. "What did you—" "Down," Corvin said again, not to Delia. Ezra's knees buckled as if gravity had remembered a rule it wanted to enforce. Corvin plucked the vials from their harness and squeezed until glass gave, careful not to let the liquid touch his skin. It hissed and died on the seal like sugar on a skillet. Ezra panted. "She isn't yours?" "She isn't yours either," Delia said, and was surprised at how level she sounded. Corvin did not look away from Ezra. "You will carry a message to whoever pays your rent," he said. "The Vesper Court does not bottle its hunger. We do not buy it in bars. We do not sell it to boys." Ezra's jaw hopped. "You sound like a priest." "I sound like a man who does not need a leash," Corvin said, and pressed Ezra's wrist just enough to make the lesson memorize itself in bone. "Go home. Don't come back. If your employer insists, tell them I will bring the invoice to their door in person." He released him. Ezra stumbled to the hall, spun, looked at Delia like she was a prize in a game he'd been cheated out of, and fled. The door closed. The seal sank from alarm to embers. Delia let out a breath and then another, shaking. Corvin turned. The look on his face was not hunger. It was a ferocious, frightening gratitude. "You answered me," he said softly, "and it answered you. I don't know what I did." "You consented to we," he said. And that should have been corny. It wasn't. "You matched. You co-authored a law. Is this where you tell me I'm rare again?" "This is where I tell you you are dangerous in the correct direction," he said. "And that I am very proud." "Stop," she said, heat running up her neck. "Never," he said, and for 2 breaths they were ridiculous and safe. Then her phone buzzed. "Noor. Kumquat?" Delia typed, "We're okay. We'll call." Corvin read the bubble with one arched brow. "Kumquat?" Emergency pineapple felt 2 on the nose. He made the quiet laugh again, the one that sounded like someone shaving cedar. "Eat. Then sleep. Then we deal with landlords and snow queens." "You're staying? If you ask." It didn't feel like surrender anymore. "Stay," she said. The landlord turned out to be a gentle man with a careful mustache and numbers for eyes. Corvin arrived at his office with a crisp binder, a smile you could skate on, and a check whose commas made the fluorescent lights hum. "Renovation budget," he told Mr. Abbasi, "and a note that if anyone attempts to purchase this address, I will outbid them until the sun fails." Mr. Abbasi blinked. "Sir, that's not... how... legal?" Corvin's smile sharpened. Efficient." Delia watched him stitch law out of air and thought, not for the first time, that monsters were not the opposite of men. They were men extended, hopes and hungers drawn to mathematical scale. Corvin folded a paper just so, and the office seemed to agree to something. "Your tenant is under my ward," he said at the end. "You will not suffer for it." "I don't suffer," Mr. Abbasi said faintly. "I keep boilers alive and roof leaks collected in a jar. The jar may be retired." Corvin placed a card on the desk. embossed with a raven and the number she had summoned. If anyone named Mireille calls, forward her to me. Say Vesper asks it. When they were back on the sidewalk, Delia let herself laugh, finally, because the world had tilted and landed in a place that had tile and hot water. You just bought my building. I bought your safety, he said, as if the correction mattered. Buildings come free with the bundle. You're absurd. You're alive, he said gravely. I will continue the absurdity while that remains true. Don't phrase it like a promise you have to bleed for. All good promises cost. She wanted to tell him not to make the city bruise for her, and wanted simultaneously to make the whole city pay rent to his patience. The interior Concord hummed, a metronome set to wee. She did not know which of them it comforted. Delia trained. She hated the word. It smelled like gym membership and grind. What they did in the weeks that followed was not grind. It was learning where her mind touched the world when the world was thinner than skin. Corvin taught like a man who had been a student for a very long time. He did not bark. He stacked questions and let her climb them. How do you know when the seal is listening? It warms. When it warms, what color is the memory it calls up? Red. Not garish. Antique. Like a ribbon that used to be someone. When it warms that color, can you ask it to widen? She did. It did. The boundary at the threshold became a soft rectangle that included the shoe rack and a sixth of the rug. When she pushed too far, the heat went sharp, warning instead of welcome, and Corvin's hand was there, lightly at her wrist, reminding her she had bones with limits. Again, he said, each time she flinched away, and she learned that again could be affection. He taught her a sigil to wear inside the left wrist, inkless, memorized, a wristwatch of intent. When danger scraped, she pressed that place and breathed, and the Concord hummed, "He's here," even when he was across town. Noor insisted on learning a version. Corvin eyed her warily until Noor punched a heavy bag in his gym with competent rage. "Fine," he said. "Family rate." Noor drew her wrist sigil sloppily and said, "If he hurts you, I burn his house down." "That is inconvenient," Corvin observed, not disagreeing. Delia dreamed less of faceless pursuit and more of doors that opened when she asked them to. She woke into mornings where snow pretended purity and people pretended it with. Ezra texted exactly once, "You can't keep her," and she blocked him. Mireille sent a fruit basket that contained a perfect blood orange and a blade disguised as a serving knife. Delia ate the orange and handed the knife to Corvin. "A valentine," he said, and melted it into a curlicue on her stove with a look. "You cheated," she said, delighted. "I am cheating on your behalf," he said. "I intend to make a habit of it." Spring arrived late, like an apology, and with it a rumor. The Thirstrights had made a purchase in the old train tunnels, a property deed with too many signatures in too many inks. Corvin went down with 3 house heads and came back with ash on his coat and a cut at his throat that looked like the city had tried to write its name on him and failed. Delia pressed a clean cloth to the cut and said nothing for a count of 30, because love shows itself in the silence where scolding lives. He watched her watch him and did not make the joke men make when they are hiding their fear. When she tied the cloth off, he bent his head so his mouth brushed her knuckles. Not hungry, grateful. "They're building a bottling line," he said. "With labels." His mouth thinned. "We'll break it." "We," she said, and felt no vertigo. Corvin drew a map on her kitchen table. "Here." He circled a section where tunnels knotted. "The old telegraph spur, they'll route their shipments through funerals and flower deliveries." "God. Capital," he said, disgusted again, her favorite of his moods. "It gentrifies the worst things first." They did not go alone. House Vesper knew how wars start, when one house takes a prize and every loser knocks together a coalition. Corvin called a Concord moot in her apartment because it was hers, and because the interior seal made it the safest place in the city to say treason and mean justice. They drank coffee around her table and argued about the line between protection and control. Delia said 3 sentences, and all of them landed. "We're pretending the bottlers are new," she told them, as they debated what was permitted. "They're not. They're your old clients with better glassware. Pick a side before the labels make you nostalgic." Lady Murray laughed, sharp and pleased. "Oh, Corvin, she's almost as rude as you." "She is kinder," he said, and did not look away from Delia when he said it. They built a plan that used law for the first hour and claw for the second. Corvin preferred hour 1. Delia found herself disturbingly ready for hour 2. She slept badly, woke with a word in her chest that wasn't hers, enough, and wrote it on the wrist place before she had coffee. The night they went down, the city pretended it didn't have a basement. Traffic moved like normal blood. Restaurants spilled, laughter onto the sidewalks. The moon did its work. Underneath all that, in the railbone dark, the Thirstrights lit their laboratory candles and blessed their pumps. Delia wore boots Noor called "Don't you dare ruin those," and a hoodie Corvin had indeed had runes stitched into, barely visible, like sarcasm in thread. He looked like night school for ghosts. Coat, gloves, a mouth that had decided to be merciful after the obligations were met. "Stay with me," he said, always. They slid into the tunnel along a side shaft. The seal at her wrist burned a polite warning when they passed certain seams, old curses, older debt. Corvin's hand on her shoulder corrected her path, which he did not do like a man steering a possession. He did it like a man reminding a dancer where the floor would be. The lab lay in an old switching chamber. Lanterns ringed the room. Men and women in aprons worked at benches where red liquid shivered in narrow-necked glass. The smell, sugar and rot, moved through the air on its knees. A man with a white coat and an expression he'd rehearsed in a mirror raised his hands. "Gentlemen," he said. "Ladies. Lord Vesper, we can discuss—" "Turn it off," Corvin said. "Business is a euphemism for worship." "What do we worship?" The white coat smiled. "Need. We just make it efficient." Delia stepped forward. "You bottle people." He looked at her like she was a minor circumference around Corvin's center. "We bottle what you spill. Then we'll stop spilling," she said, and realized she meant it for everyone in the room. The Concord hour lasted 9 minutes. Corvin dismantled their paper with the cool joy of a mathematician erasing a bad proof. When they tried to sign again with the ink of money, Lady Murray said, "Boring," and snapped her fan shut like a pistol slide. Hour 2 arrived. The lights went out. The lanterns didn't go dark. They decided to illuminate what Delia needed to see. She pressed her wrist and the seal sang. Corvin moved like intent personified, unbottling vials by crushing them into salt, not spilling a drop on skin or floor. The workers, some hungry, some just obedient, ran. Delia broke glass when she had to, drew lines where she could, and when Ezra appeared at the far door with a look that said, "I told you," she didn't wait for the speech. "Down," she said, and he went. He was breathing. He would breathe tomorrow. The line between merciful and naive cut a fine edge in her throat. Corvin saw it and pressed his shoulder to hers for one heartbeat amid the unmaking. "Enough," she said aloud, and felt the tunnels hear her. When they climbed into cold air again, dawn bruised the edge of the sky. Corvin's coat smelled like iron and irrevocable choices. Delia's hands shook. He reached for them. She let him. "We didn't fix it," she said. "We ended this," he said. "Fixing is work. We can do work." She laughed, a raw sound, full of something she could finally name. We. He agreed, and there was no oath in it. There was breakfast. They walked home under a sky that forgot the word snow and remembered the word light. At her threshold, the seal warmed to greet them. Corvin paused with his hand on the jamb like a sailor touching a ship's name. "You're not my sparrow," he said quietly, "but you are my equal." "You're not my monster," she said, "but you are my miracle." He lowered his forehead to hers. "Stay." "Always," she said. And the door, hers, theirs, the city's, opened. Delia learned the names of corridors no map owned. The city had veins that weren't roads, steam lines, service stairs, a cut of air between buildings where winter never fully died. She walked them with Corvin until she could feel the difference between worn and waiting stones. The interior concord thrummed at her wrist when she passed particular hinges, as if the world had its own knuckles to rap. Word of the raid slid through the underworld like ink in water. The thirst rites disbanded in public, reconvened in whispers, and the sanctum pretended Ezra had been acting alone. Lady Mireille sent Delia another note sealed with frost. "If Vesper insists on chivalry, you'll need an ally who prefers results." Attached, a brass invitation card etched with a starburst, "The masquerade of claims, vernal equinox, masks mandatory." At the bottom, a postscript like a wink. "Bring your node." "Bring your equal," Delia corrected under her breath. Corvin read the card and neither frowned nor smiled. He filed it with a lawyer's care and a soldier's memory. Noor stationed herself in Delia's kitchen with a laptop, a stack of tangerines, and a spreadsheet titled "Contingency, but make it cute." "If a supernatural gala goes wrong," she said, "text me kumquat tuxedo, and I pull the fire alarms on 5 blocks." "They'll hear the pipes sighing and know it's me," Corvin said. "Then I'll pull the sprinklers," Noor said cheerfully. "Moisture is the enemy of couture." Corvin almost smiled. "We'll call if we need a weather witch." "And if you don't," Noor said, "you send selfies of the masks." Training shifted from thresholds to ward walking, learning to sense the echo of seals laid long ago and step between their harmonics instead of into them. "All wards are a conversation between a fear and a promise," Corvin said, holding her hand over a section of brick that vibrated faintly. "Decide which one you want to answer." Delia reached, felt the fear. Intrusion, knives, contracts with other people's blood. Felt the promise. Rest, keep, stay, and put her weight on the second. The wall ceased to resist. She breathed a laugh. "It feels like finding the chorus to a song and finally being on key." "Exactly," Corvin said, pleased enough to forget to hide it. That night she dreamed of doors, not closing but flowering, each hinge a petal, each latch a small brass tongue saying welcome if she asked with her name. She woke to a knocking that wasn't a threat. Ezra stood at the bottom of the stair in a thrift store suit and a face he hadn't slept out of. No knife, no harness. He had both hands up like a man approaching a feral cat. "Don't," Corvin said softly behind Delia. "I won't cross the seal," Ezra said. "I came to cross a line." "You've crossed plenty," Delia said. He swallowed. "The sanctum cut me loose. Said I embarrassed the prayer. I'm not here for absolution." He flicked a glance at Corvin, then forced it back to Delia. "I'm here to warn you. The masquerade isn't just a party. Mireille wants to force an audit." "Of what?" Delia asked. "Of lineage," Ezra said. "Vesper's claim to the throne. There's a clause the houses can invoke, trial by witness and mirror. If they break his daylight protections during the rite, they can bar his claim." Corvin went still in the way that wasn't human stillness. It was the absence of weather. "They wouldn't risk—" "They would," Ezra said, a little desperate. "Mireille hates that your ethics make you stronger. She'll fracture you the way the thirst rites tried. Different weapons. Same aim." Delia stepped forward until the seal warmed the bones of her feet. "Why warn us?" Ezra looked miserably young. Because you didn't kill me when it was neat, and I don't know what to do with that, except try to deserve it. Corvin watched him a long beat, old anger and older grief playing chess behind his eyes. If you're lying, I know, Ezra said, and backed down the stair like a man leaving a holy place he wasn't invited to pray in. Corvin did not speak for a count of 10. Then, we'll attend. Obviously, Delia said. But we don't go to be audited. We go to hold the mirror up to them. And if they break the glass? Corvin asked. Then we make a window, Delia said, surprising herself, and climb through. Masks came in 3 categories: animals, architecture, and lies. Delia chose a raven because subtlety lost to comedy in a world where ravens were literal heraldry. Corvin wore a simple black half mask that made his mouth too honest, which annoyed Delia in advance of any conversation where honesty would tempt cruelty. The ballroom was an old train museum bribed into elegance: polished floors, a suspended locomotive gleaming like a knight, banners in jewel tones. Every house flew its colors, every smile was edged. Human donors and monsters who paid like humans mingled with the careful choreography of people who kept a ledger hidden behind the ribcage. Lady Mireille met them beneath a chandelier that actively refused dust. Her mask was a sliver of mirror edged in frost. Lord Vesper, she purred. Sparrow. Equal, Delia said too sweetly. Mireille's eyes glittered. How? Democratic. She lifted a small bell from a velvet tray. Shall we play at tradition? Tradition does not play, Corvin said. It performs. Mireille stepped onto the dais and rang the bell once. The room's gossip flattened into attention. Houses, she said, smiling as if she'd already been applauded. We celebrate spring by testing claims. Lord Vesper asserts stewardship over corridors he did not carve. He asserts restraint as law. How modern. A soft ripple of amusement. We ask the mirrors. 2 attendants wheeled out tall, silvered panels old enough to have seen candlelight under kings. Trial by mirror, Mireille said. Witness and reflection. Step forward, claimant. Corvin did not look at Delia. He did not need to. The interior concord hummed with me inside her sternum. He stepped into the circle of varnished floor the way a man steps into weather he cannot choose, unbowed, prepared to be rained on. Mireille's voice went saccharine. Remove his daylight ring? A murmur. Daylight rings were myth, the way insurance was myth, until you filed a claim. They didn't make day safe. Nothing did. But they muddied the air long enough for a careful man to cross a sunlit hallway. Corvin slid the ring from his middle finger with the caution of someone undressing a wound. Mirrors, Mireille said. Reflect the truth. Light shifted. The chandeliers did not brighten, but the air sharpened around the silver, as if noon were looking over midnight's shoulder. Delia felt the concord flare. She stepped to the edge of the circle. Out of bounds, a man in green protested. Stakeholder, Delia said, and laid her palm to the floor. The threshold here was in the wood, not the door. A seam where a museum had been made out of a ruin. She pressed the inkless sigil at her wrist to it and whispered, Welcome. The floor warmed. The invisible line widened until it included Corvin's shoes. Mireille's smile tightened. That is not permitted. It isn't forbidden, Delia said, keeping her voice pleasant. The rite says witness and mirror. I am the witness. A house head in red, Lord Etienne, who loved rules like children loved sugar, cleared his throat. The rite does not prescribe a witness's ward. Thank you, Delia said, and hoped she lived to send him a fruit basket. Mireille flicked her fingers. The attendants pivoted the mirrors until they framed Corvin on either side. Daylight gathered in them, not sun exactly, but the mathematical idea of sun, an accounting of how it falls. The edge of it bit his cheekbone. He did not flinch. Delia felt the concord strain and fed it steady breath. Mireille stepped closer, mask catching candle flame and throwing it back as cold. House Vesper, she said, you claim restraint instead of conquest. You claim halls you won't tax and monsters you won't muzzle. How quaint. Mirrors, show us whether a man who won't take can. On keep. The daylight in the silver tilted harder. Corvin's skin went whiter. An old burn on his wrist ghosted up like a bad memory. Delia pressed the floor. The ward flexed, remaking itself as a roof instead of a rail. She felt dozens of eyes. She ignored all but the two that mattered. Since when, she said into the stillness, do we break a man to prove he can keep something safe? Since always, Mireille said. Then change, Delia said, and let the word carry. The mirrors didn't like that. They trembled. A crack scissored across one like lightning deciding to write. Corvin stood very still in the lengthening knife of not quite day. Delia's breath went steady and low, the way he'd taught her on nights when panic tried to redline her pulse. With me, the Concord murmured. She pictured the threshold at home. She pictured the door sighing when his hand met it. She pictured the word they had made between them that wasn't property, wasn't leash, wasn't fragile. It was we. The floor warmed under her palm like a living thing recognizing its name. The knot day in the mirrors guttered. Corvin's shoulders settled half an inch, like a man taking a weight into his bones instead of his skin. Mireille's smile cracked. Enough, she began. Enough, Delia said louder. The second mirror split down the middle with the neatness of a decision. The room inhaled. The chandeliers buzzed like a hive disturbed. Lord Etienne cleared his throat again, this time drier. By the letter of the right, the claimant did not withdraw, nor did he burn. Mireille's eyes went winter black. By the letter of the right, his witness interfered. Etienne lifted a bony hand. The right has never barred mercy. Mercy, Mireille whispered as if tasting a foreign spice. From you? She looked back at Delia, hate bright as a knife. This is not over. It rarely is, Delia said quietly. They did not dance. They left with every gaze crawling over the door in their backs. In the car, Corvin sat with his hands very still on his knees for an entire block. Then he lifted one, turned it palm up, and found Delia's without looking. Thank you, he said. Not a lord's gratitude, a man's. I didn't save you, she said. We kept you. We kept us, he said, voice roughened. He kissed her knuckles like a prayer you say after the disaster swerves. The masquerade had consequences. Mireille bought a newspaper. The headline the next morning named Corvin as the anachronism in a bespoke coat, and Delia as his mortal hobby. Noor tore the paper in half, then in quarters, then in a sculpture of confetti that made the recycling bin look festive. They can't break him with noon, they'll try with narrative, Noor said. We counter-program. Corvin flatlined through mockery with the serenity of a glacier. Delia did not. She learned the cadence of fury and how to edit it into something with aim. They wrote a statement that refused to dignify, which Corvin sent by courier on thick paper because email encouraged laziness. Lady Mireille countered with a charity gala where the theme was light. Invitations studded with embedded crystals arrived for everyone except Delia. Which is a relief, Delia said. I don't own an outfit called weaponized glitter. You own yourself, Corvin said. That terrifies them more than any wardrobe. Night work returned, corridors to tend, small courts to settle. A bar on 10th, whose bouncer had begun taking bribes in the currency of thrall. A woman who woke with marks on her neck and dreams of rivers. A fledgling who thought clubbing meant literally. Delia found she could sense the wrongness in a room like a draft through a closed window. She leaned into that draft and closed it. Ezra kept sending scraps, overheard sanctuary plans, a set of names stitched into a ledger, a storage unit near the docks that smelled like salt and secrets. Each message came with no plea for absolution, which Delia trusted more than apologies. She and Corvin raided the unit on a Tuesday and found 38 empty vials and 1 crate of labels. Sunbite. Corvin burned them with a look. What if they pivot? Delia asked, watching the labels wrinkle. If they can't bottle hunger, they'll bottle shame. They already have, Corvin said. We'll unstopper those too. At home, Delia and Noor cooked elaborate pasta at weird hours and made lists for battles that had no etiquette. Sometimes Corvin hovered like a storm at the edge of the kitchen, offering a second hand when the colander made the sink tantrum. Sometimes he sat at the table and untied his neck like a man learning how to relax out loud. One night, Delia woke to the sense of being watched and found Corvin looking not at her, but at the door, the warm underseal pulsing. What? She whispered. Someone laid a thread, he murmured. A listening line. Fine work. Thirst rights? Sanctum, he said. Clerks who like cursive. Delia slid out of bed and pressed her wrist. The Concord pulsed awake like a cat deciding it was ready to be adored. She pictured scissors. She pictured Noor's confetti. She pictured removing an eavesdropper's ear and replacing it with a tin can attached to nothing. Gentle, Corvin warned. If you yank, they'll feel the rip. She stroked the line instead, the way you soothe a damaged wire, and whispered, Hush. The thread went slack. Somewhere uptown, a bureaucrat heard silence and filed it under glitch. Corvin exhaled one of his small cedar laughs and kissed her temple like gratitude disguised as practicality. You're getting good, he said. I have an excellent teacher, she said, and meant both of them. Mireille escalated. She bought the building across from Delia's and put in a boutique whose windows were mirrors. People wandered in and came out with perfectly normal shopping bags and shadows slightly thinner than before. Delia felt the thinness and set her jaw. Bottling on Main Street, Noor said. Of course. We can shut her down through code violations, Corvin said, picking up the city regulations like a deck of cards. Exits, sprinklers, occupancy misstatements. She'll pay the fines and smile, Delia said. Let's embarrass the pitch. They staged a midnight unboxing live stream. Noor's idea, Delia's courage, Corvin's placid indulgence of internet as a concept. Delia stood on the sidewalk in a raven mask and a denim jacket and held up one of Mireille's sleek bags. Tonight's product is a mood, she said to a viewership that ticked upward like a heartbeat. Recommended use? None. She opened the box. Inside, tissue paper folded like origami around a simple crystal. Pretty, faintly warm, labeled Brighton. She held it in her palm until the warmth turned to tug. The interior Concord stirred. She felt it reaching for whatever kernel of self someone had given up for shine. Here's what it does, Delia said, voice steady. She set the crystal on the sidewalk, pressed her wrist, and whispered, Return. The crystal shivered. It cracked. A small breath exhaled. Across the street, a woman paused, hand to throat, eyes suddenly wet. She looked around like she'd lost a word and then found it. The comments flew. What is that? Is this a bit? I felt something. Where do I buy the reverse of that? Noor typed back. You don't buy it, you choose it. Corvin stood just out of frame, a guardrail, a horizon line, a promise. By morning, 3 smaller shops returned their stock. By afternoon, Mireille's boutique papered its windows with inventory reset. By evening, a blogger who loved scandal more than breath wrote a piece titled The Ethics of Shine, which made Delia roll her eyes and Corvin send a thank you basket anyway. Ezra texted at dusk. Sanctum meeting tonight. They're pivoting from you to your landlord. Watch the boiler permits. Corvin already had a lawyer at the municipal building, sipping terrible coffee and smiling like a banker who liked a bar fight. Why haven't they tried to take me? Delia asked, pacing. Not hostage, not pawn. Me. Corvin's eyes warmed, then cooled with intent. Because they finally understand you are not lever or leash. You are load-bearing. Pull and the building falls on them. Flattering, she muttered, but the Concord hummed in agreement. Summer dragged its feet. Steam from street vents smelled like old raincoats. The city learned where it hurt and started to heal there. Tiny, unglamorous closures of loopholes, nighttime markets with better locks, bartenders who learned to throw out patrons who ordered thrall like it was a Negroni. The world did not become kind. It became better at noticing when it wasn't. On the longest day, Corvin's house, not a castle, however much it behaved like one, opened. Its courtyard to the neighborhood. Musicians set up beneath pear trees. Kids invented games with chalk and 2 stray sunflower stems. Noor taught anyone who asked the wrist sigil and how to say no in a tone that codified it as law. Corvin sat on a low wall with his sleeves rolled and let an elderly woman lecture him about zoning until he became an ally by sheer osmosis. Delia watched him laugh with his eyes and wondered what it had cost to learn that. Later, when the courtyard had emptied and the lanterns hummed like bees at rest, she touched the scar at his wrist, the ghost of Mirror Day, and said, "I want to know who gave you that." He didn't deflect. He didn't turn it into a romantic bruise. "A boy with a bottle," he said, in 1913. He looked at his hands. He didn't live long enough to regret it. She covered his hand with both of hers. "Then we do penance by keeping the next boy." "We do work," he said, voice soft but absolute. "Penance is for people who want to suffer. I want to build." "Good," she said. "I'm allergic to martyrdom." He tipped his head until his forehead touched hers. "Stay." "Always," she said, and the concord settled around them like a door closing against weather. The sanctum didn't quit. It recalculated. A notice arrived, certified mail, announcing a review of mortal attachments. Delia read it twice, 3 times, then handed it to Corvin. "They're going to pretend I'm a hazard." "You are," he said, and when her eyes flashed, he smiled. "To their thesis." The review would be held in an old church whose pews had learned more secrets than most therapists. Ezra met them on the steps, hair combed as if that might rewrite his history, worry wearing shiny at the elbows. "They'll try to bait you," he warned, "into confessing dependence, into admitting the ward is addiction. Don't dignify the premise." "Noted," Delia said, and left her fear on the stoop like a wet umbrella. Inside, 3 clergy sat behind a table made from an altar that had retired its miracles. The one in the middle wore spectacles and a smile that apologized for nothing. "Miss Santos," he said, "you have entangled yourself with an immortal. For your own safety, we're empowered to examine the nature of the bond." "Empowered by whom?" Delia asked, sitting without waiting to be told. "By tradition," he said, pleased with his own word. "Tradition is peer pressure from dead people," she said pleasantly. "What's your legal standing?" The smile hiccuped. Corvin's knee touched hers under the table, a quiet laugh. The sanctum man folded his hands. "Do you consent to a demonstration of your autonomy?" "No," Delia said. "I consent to a conversation. Paradigm. Consent is a ritual, not a trap." He tried a different tack. "How often do you rely on Lord Vesper's protection?" "How often do you rely on locks?" she countered. "Or laws, or literacy." A younger cleric leaned in. "Is the mark addictive?" "It's a conversation," Delia said. "Sometimes I initiate, sometimes it does. Always I choose." The older cleric took off his glasses and polished them like they had sinned. "Would you leave him if asked?" "By whom?" Delia asked. "God." Delia looked at the stained glass, at saints with faces like good bread and old grief. If God asked me to leave a man who saves people at 1 in the morning because he can't stand to let suffering metastasize, I'd ask God to sit down and reframe. She smiled. No teeth. And I'd keep the door open if God wanted to learn. A hush fell that wasn't defeat so much as the moment before a chess player resigns with grace. The cleric set his spectacles back on his nose and nodded once. "We will file no injunction," he said. "Be careful where you teach your wristwatch." "In the hands of those who need it," Delia said. "Which is everyone," Ezra said under his breath, a prayer disguised as sarcasm. They left the church into air that smelled like rain considering itself. Corvin turned to her on the steps and said nothing, which told her everything. She curled her fingers into his coat and tugged him close enough to feel the laugh in his chest. "You did not set the church on fire," he murmured. "Not with visible flame," she said, and Noor texted, "Kumquat tuxedo," followed by a photo of the kitchen table and 2 bowls of noodles like a benediction. They went home. July taught the city to sweat. Asphalt breathed heat like an animal. Delia learned ward walking in sunlit alleys where the Concord whispered under her skin even at noon. Fainter, yes, like music through walls, but there. Corvin shadowed the lessons from shade, not hovering so much as aligning, the way a lighthouse aligns with a ship that knows its map but respects rocks. Rumor said Murray was collecting mirrors again. Not antiques this time, but solar panels with silvered backs, frames beveled at custom angles. Ezra texted coordinates of a warehouse by the river and a time, 3:17 a.m. They'll move them before dawn. Noor dumped iced coffee into 3 cups like sacrament and tossed out hats. "Everyone hydrate and nobody martyr," she said. "Martyrs are bad for neighborhoods." They went in through a loading bay that had learned to squeal quietly. The warehouse smelled like dust and money, stacked on pallets, glinting rectangles shrink-wrapped and labeled with a fake brand, Auric Solutions. Corvin palmed a corner. The light in the panel shifted as if embarrassed. "They're building a dayline," he said, "to pipe afternoon into places it has no right to be." "Why?" Delia asked, already hating the answer. "To break protections," he said, "to turn sanctuary into scorch." A forklift beeped in the dark, the soft, ordinary sound of an operator coming back from a smoke break. Ezra stepped from behind the stacks, hands raised to show he wasn't armed. He looked like he hadn't slept inside a week. "We have 20 minutes, he said. "Then the river trucks roll." "How many sites?" Corvin asked. 7, Ezra said. 3 on rooftops, 4 in tunnels. Mireille wants to thread sun like wire. Delia laid her palm on the nearest panel. The interior Concord prickled, not in warning but in offense, as if someone had plagiarized a hymn. "I can trip them," she said. "Not forever. Long enough to make them regret believing physics is polite." "Do it," Corvin said. She moved down the row, fingers finding seams, breath finding tempo. At each stack she whispered a small unspell. "Reflect what is asked, not what is forced." The panels dulled, as if learning shame. Ezra watched with a look that might have been wonder or terror. "They said you were a leash," he murmured. "You're a fuse box." "Pick better metaphors," Noor said, glaring at a security camera until it understood it was offline. They were 3 pallets from the end when floodlights snapped on and men in reflective vests poured through the bay doors, led by a woman in a yellow hard hat and a smile like litigation. "Private property," she said brightly, "and tampering with safety equipment is a crime." Mireille didn't bother to attend. She sent professionals. Corvin stepped forward. "We're exercising a recall." "On what, Lord Vesper?" Hardhat asked. "Light?" "Leverage," Delia said, and threw the switch she'd been saving, the one that trusted the Concord to listen at scale. Every panel she'd touched blinked, briefly, into true mirror. The floodlights bounced back at the crew like a white sea. Hardhat threw an arm over her eyes and swore. 3 men stumbled. One dropped a clipboard that skittered like a startled crab. By the time the lights normalized, pallets were sweating with harmless condensation, and Noor had driven a forklift gently through the exit to block the bay, like a sacrificial buffalo. They didn't need to fight. They needed to stall. Sirens wound somewhere far. Delia didn't love cops, but she loved bureaucracy when it came to confiscation. They left by the river door, breath loud in their ears. On the dock, Corvin's hand found Delia's, warm despite everything, as if touch were the opposite of scorch. "You keep making windows," he said. "Until they stop building prisons," she said, and Ezra said, "Low enough for the night, amen." The first dayline test fired at noon 2 days later from the roof of a decommissioned post office. It wasn't dramatic. No beam-carving buildings, no instant ash. Just a hush. Like the sound a room makes when it realizes it's not private anymore. Shadows shifted wrong. Birds took a long, confounded loop. Delia felt it at her wrist like a pulled stitch. She ran for the door. Corvin was already in the hall, jaw set, tie in his pocket, old fury wearing a new suit. They climbed 3 flights that had become familiar and unlovely. At the top, the threshold heat had dimmed to a warning ember. "They're bleeding noon down the block," Corvin said. "Then we don't meet it with night," Delia said, breath ragged from stairs. "We meet it with shade." Shade was not absence. Shade was a choice. She pressed her palm to the floor and pictured leaves, pictured an awning an old woman pulled out every summer, pictured a mother standing between her child and the sun with a beach towel and a laugh. The Concord stirred. Not wary, willing. The threshold warmth flowed outward in a pattern that felt like trees making decisions. Here. Yes. There. No. Across the room, sunlight that had no right to be inched across the rug and stopped, baffled. Corvin exhaled. "You negotiated with Noon." "No," Delia said, dizzy. "I told Noon not in my house, and it listened." Ezra called from the street. "We need rooftop." They ran again, this time up the building that used to be a post office, and now believed itself a laboratory. The roof was a bright plate of wrong, panels angled inward like open mouths. Technicians in vests adjusted dials. A woman in a suit checked readings on a tablet that had never seen an honest weather report. "You're trespassing," she said crisply when she saw them. "You're counterfeiting the sky," Delia said. "Pick a worse crime." "Cease," Corvin told the techs, and every line in his body said there will be consequences if you don't. 2 stopped on reflex. 1 kept twisting a knob. Ezra's hand shot out and broke the handle cleanly. He stared at his own fingers like he didn't know them. "I'm tired," he said, voice flat. "Of helping bad ideas." The woman in the suit smiled with too many teeth and not enough soul. "A mortal," she said, meaning Delia. "Cute. We can litigate your consent after lunch." "Consent is not retroactive," Delia said, walking into the circle of panels, "and neither is trespass." Corvin tried to catch her arm. She didn't dodge. She agreed with him and kept going. At the center of the array, she could feel the sunline like a wire humming. She pressed her wrist, touched the wire, and did the most audacious thing the Concord had taught her. She asked it what it wanted. What it wanted, astonishingly, was to land. Light liked walls. Light liked skin. Light liked the honest friction of being caught and turned warm. It did not like being weaponized. It did not like being narrowed to a blade. "Hey," she whispered, half to the panels, half to the sky. "Wrong job." The hum changed. 1 panel twitched, then another, like fish remembering river. The woman in the suit hissed through her teeth. "Turn it back." "You can't litigate photons," Noor said, and snapped a photo that made 1,000 small screens into allies. The array shivered and went still. Sunlight resumed the ordinary mercy of afternoon. Corvin's hand at Delia's back was a warranty and a question. She leaned into it. The suited woman swore into her tablet and stomped toward the stairwell. "This isn't over," she threw back. "It rarely is," Delia said, and Noor whooped, and Ezra laughed like he hadn't in a decade. When backlash comes, it wears good shoes. Mireille filed an injunction to inspect the Vesper seal for public safety. The city, flattered by legalese, scheduled a hearing. Delia practiced not setting microphones on fire with words. Corvin shaved and wore a tie and let his mouth learn bureaucracy's grammar again. Ezra sat in the back with a posture that begged invisibility and failed. Noor live-tweeted with discretion and knives. The inspector assigned was a woman named Tanaka, who had a crow tattoo behind her ear and a patience that made Delia like her instantly. "We have noise complaints," Tanaka said, flipping to a tab. "Also a rumor about mirrors. Also a fruit basket from a lady who has opinions about your aesthetics." "Do you want the basket?" Delia asked. "We regift to teachers." Tanaka's mouth tilted. "I prefer bribes in the form of compliance." She looked at the doorway as if it were a suspect. "Show me your seal." Delia lifted the rug, pressed her wrist, and asked, rather than showed. The threshold warmed, not glowing. Tanaka didn't need that, just exhaling like a dog deciding a stranger could be a friend. Tanaka crouched and peered at nothing visible. "Feels like standing under a porch during rain," she said finally. "Legal question. Who in this apartment invited it?" "Me," Delia said, repeatedly. "And who maintains it?" "Joint custody," Corvin said. "Tenant and house." Tanaka scribbled. "Objection from the fancy lady. House control constitutes unlawful surveillance." "Surveillance listens through," Delia said. "This listens to. It's more doorbell than camera." Tanaka drummed her pen. "Injuries?" "It prevents them," Delia said. "Mostly to me." Tanaka stood. "I don't love private law. I like public safety. This behaves like a lock, not a leash." She signed the form with a looping flourish that soothed Delia's vertebrae. "Inspection passed. Tell your lady I prefer pears to frost." Outside, Noor hugged Delia so fiercely the Concord purred. Ezra exhaled like a diver reaching daylight. Corvin, formal, contained Corvin, closed his eyes for one bare instant and then opened them calm. "Dinner," he said, as if the decision could be armor. "Pasta," Noor said. "We're rich in noodles." "Bring pears," Tanaka called, already onto a housing case with less poetry and more mold. The night Mireille finally overreached smelled like ozone and a burned patch of luck. She had bought up the mirrors the city wouldn't confiscate and wired them into a mobile rig, a convoy of polished trailers she could park outside any sanctuary and angle to carve. She chose a shelter 2 blocks from Delia's because some people volunteer their villainy by making it personal. The convoy arrived after midnight, sleek and white, like a wedding that lied. Noor texted a picture with an unprintable caption. Ezra's message came on top of it. "I'm inside her comms. You have 15 minutes." They ran. The shelter director met them with a baseball bat and a priest in sneakers. "We've been told we're under evaluation," she said dryly, "by a woman with cheekbones and no conscience." "Hold the bat," Delia said. "We'll hold the light." The mirrors rotated, graceful and homicidal. Delia stepped into the street with her hands up like a conductor who trusted the orchestra. The Concord thrummed, hungry to be useful. Corvin stood at her shoulder, one hand raised, the old sign for stop when carriages forgot people existed. Mireille herself stood on the lead trailer in a white suit that drank neon. "Darling," she called, "try mercy now." "Gladly," Delia said, and did the impudent thing. She bowed to the mirrors. She spoke not to glass, but to design. "You are meant to make rooms bright," she thought. "Tables, Faces, letters, not wounds. She pictured kitchens at dusk, women putting on lipstick to meet themselves kindly, barbers turning chairs toward light so they could make men handsome for their own eyes. She thought of children flashing the beam from a cheap mirror to make their cats chase sun. The convoy's angle changed by a degree. Mireille frowned. "Stop her!" she snapped, and a tech yanked a lever and the mirrors skewed to weapon again. "Together," Corvin said softly. Delia took his hand, not because she needed it to channel. She didn't, but because the city needed to see what we looked like. She pressed her wrist. He pressed nothing. The air between their palms learned a language made of promise. The threshold at Delia's door hummed in sympathy a block away. Other thresholds, ones she'd never touched, answered faintly. Apartment doors, stoops, the mouth of a bakery that ghosted butter at 5 a.m., the brass rail of a synagogue, the hinge of a mosque, the heavy glass of a bodega. Shade bloomed. Not darkness. Shade. Across the shelter's facade, a canopy unfurled that had no visible edges, like the memory of trees insisting on their civic duty. The convoy's blades of noon flattened against it, turned to something useful. Warmth instead of harm, and slid down into the street, where kids on scooters would, tomorrow, chalk hopscotch grids into it and call them sons. The crowd that had gathered, neighbors, a few late-shift nurses, 3 bikers who believed in saints, made a sound human throats only make when power chooses gentleness. Mireille didn't flinch. She smiled and snapped her fingers. A figure in black vaulted from the second trailer, lean, fast, knife in each hand. Ezra swore under his breath. Her new boy. He came at Corvin. "Mine," Delia said, and stepped into the knives. She didn't need speed. She needed angle. The Concord taught it to her mid-stride. She caught his right wrist with an economy that would have made a dojo clap, used his own momentum to roll him harmlessly wide, and held the knife in her other palm like she'd just corrected a place setting. He snarled, twisted, and met Corvin's serenity at chest level. "Go home," Corvin said, not unkind, and put him on the pavement with a technique that had nothing to do with vampirism and everything to do with having paid attention to bare knuckles century after century. Mireille saw the optics. 2 people refusing to be monsters no matter how many weapons she handed them, and finally, anger cracked her poise. "Enough," she hissed. "Break them." Ezra's voice came thin and tinny from the convoy loudspeakers. "Ma'am? Tiny issue? Your power inverters just decided they don't believe in you." The mirrors winked out. The trailers sat there, suddenly ridiculous. The priest in sneakers laughed once, delighted and young, and crossed himself afterward in case delight offended someone. Mireille stared at Ezra on the sidewalk. He lifted a hand and didn't apologize. "I told you I was tired," he said. "You're fired," she said. He shrugged. "I quit first." Police arrived late and useful. Permits were inspected, citations written, tow trucks called. The shelter director shook Delia's hand like they were closing a deal on a better city. Corvin looked at the sky and let his shoulders drop 1 inch. Noor live-streamed a sign taped to a trailer. "We sell light," and captioned it, "We sell receipts." Mireille vanished. The night exhaled. Delia stood in the new, honest shade and felt the Concord ease from battle to hum. Corvin's hand found the back of her neck, reverent. "You negotiated with mirrors," he said. "I gave them their job back," she said, and kissed him with the kind of certainty that makes thresholds purr. Autumn arrived like a cooler head. The city's gossip turned from scandal to policy. Tanaka drafted an ordinance recognizing resident set wards as safety devices subject to inspection, not seizure. Noor led a workshop at the community center titled Boundaries for Mortals and Others. Ezra started fixing things, wiring, leaks, the mundane and the merciful. He came by on Sundays with bagels and a look that said he didn't need forgiveness but was grateful for work. Reckoning, he said, sanding a door that had swollen with August. It's not a courtroom. It's showing up with tools. You're hired, Delia said, and meant it. Corvin went to fewer moots and more school board meetings. He wrote checks, sure, but he also learned the names of crossing guards and gave flowers to a librarian who'd fought quietly for better lights. He came home with paper cuts and satisfaction. The sanctum tried one more letter. Delia sent back a photocopy of Tanaka's ordinance and a handwritten note. Consent persists. So do we. She added a doodle of a pear because pettiness tastes better with fruit. At night, the Concord didn't just protect, it taught. Delia learned to step through a door she had never touched by listening to the rhythm of its hinge and asking gently. She learned to quiet a room where jealousy prickled by laying a fingertip on the nearest metal. Lamp, sink, mailbox, and reminding it of the day it was made to be helpful. She learned the difference between privacy and secrecy and chose the former like breathing. Love didn't arrive like a trumpet. It was a ledger balanced at last. They fought about practical things. Noor's spreadsheets in the cutlery drawer, Ezra's insistence on finishing a job before he ate, Corvin's habit of writing notes on the backs of legal envelopes and losing the fronts. They made up without theater. They kissed like contracts drafted carefully and signed with enthusiasm. One night, under a sky that finally believed in stars, Corvin set a small box on the table and did not kneel because kneeling was not his grammar. Not marriage, he said, unless you want that, later. In a courthouse with Tanaka sighing at our paperwork. This is a hinge. Inside a ring, plain, with a thin inlay of ironwood. Not a daylight ring. A threshold ring. For who? Delia asked softly. For us, he said. It binds nothing. It reminds. If either of us speaks the word stay while holding it, the nearest ward listens harder. She lifted it out and felt the Concord recognize it. Old tree. Honest metal. A geometry that honored doors. Stay, she said, testing it. And the room. Hers. Theirs. Answered with a contented warmth that made her throat ache. Yes, she said, and slipped it on, and Corvin smiled like relief, learning how to be joy. Winter walked back in, slow and inevitable. On the first real snow, kids in puffy coats wrote their names in damp powder, and someone shaped a small raven on Delia's stoop and left it to guard. The city had not become safe. It had become watchful, which was the start of safety. Mireille didn't disappear. She downsized. Her boutique rebranded as Glow and sold candles that smelled like expensive denial. The convoy was auctioned off to a solar farm with a sense of humor. The sanctum pivoted to soup kitchens and reaped the PR of belated decency. Ezra fixed a leak in Tanaka's kitchen and left without charging. She sent him a book on carpentry with a ribbon and a note. Tools first, then theology. On the solstice, Corvin walked Delia into the underground hall where the Concord first pretended to be reasonable. No mirrors, no dais, just a circle of chairs and a table with pears and coffee and papers that did not bleed. Lady Mireille attended in black, eyes polite, mouth wired shut. We meet to rewrite, Lord Etienne said, tapping a fountain pen like a gavel. Restraint will be codified, not performative. Bottling is banned. Wards recognized. Mortal partnerships honored. He looked at Delia when he said the last and did not flinch when she looked back. Enforcement? She asked. Joint, he said. Sanction and city. If either defaults, the other bites. Elegant, Corvin murmured. Earned, Mireille said tightly, as if the word tasted expensive. They signed not with blood but with ink, which was the point. When it was done, when the pears were gone and the coffee had grown pensive, Mireille crossed to Delia with a parcel the size of a hand mirror. A gift, she said. Do not read into it. I will read into it and out the other side, Delia said, but she took it. At home, she unwrapped paper to find a small mirror backed with oak, antique but humble, the sort you set on a dresser to put on your face for yourself. No enchantments hummed. The glass made her look like she'd slept enough, which was miracle enough. What is it? Noor asked, peering over her shoulder. Mercy, Delia said. Returned. They stood at the door together. Delia, Corvin, Noor, Ezra leaning on the jamb with a mug, and watched Snow decide whether to stick. The threshold ring warmed a little against Delia's finger, sensing its season. Say it, Corvin murmured, not because the ward needed it, but because they did. She held the ring and the small mirror and all the work they had done, and she said, with a surety that tasted like pear and pepper and clean winter air, Stay. The door answered. The city listened. And daylight, when it came tomorrow and every tomorrow after, would knock and be welcomed and behave. The end. Thank you so much for listening to the end of this story. Like and subscribe for more.